Hey, how's it going? And I'm excited to bring you this tutorial on using the control rig for animation in Unreal Engine. There's a lot to cover. It's a complex topic, but I hope to go over enough to get you started with animating on your own. I won't be able to cover everything, but just touch upon some of the basics. So anyway, to get started with this, we're just in the third person template, and we'll go into characters, and we'll go into mannequins. And if you'll see there's a folder called rigs. And in here, there's three control rigs. There's a basic foot IK control rig that's used for keeping the character's feet to the ground, even on unlevel surfaces. There's the control rig body. That's what we're going to be using today. And then there's a control rig procedural that's basically more of a math-based, node-based setup that you don't even have to do keyframing to be able to control things on the rig. So anyway, we're just going to be using the old school control rig where we use the controls to physically manipulate the character in any number of dimensions. Now, before we get started, there's some tips that I had. And the first one is to go into Edit, and under Editor Preferences, just search for Orbit. Choose Orbit Camera Around Selection. This will make it easy for us to get around the character by pressing Alt and left clicking. Then we want to turn off all the snapping. We want to slow down our camera speed here. And when we slow it down, remember the keyboard shortcut F, because that'll take us right down to where we need to be. And lastly, be sure to turn on auto keyframing. Now with the control rig selected, I'll hit F and we'll get right down there. Now when I brought the control rig on, you may not have noticed, but there's a number of things happened at the same time. The first thing is it put us in animation mode with these additional settings and controls. It also brought us in the anim outliner, where we can use this to kind of find things if we're having a hard time over here on the sequencer. And it brought us into the sequencer, which makes sense because we need to be able to keyframe and record our keyframes out of here. Now we won't necessarily be able to film in the sequencer, but we can record out our animation and then bring it back into sequencer to film and animate our rigs. So I'll show a little bit of that at the end. So this is going to be, unfortunately, a little bit longer than I had hoped it to be, but there's just too much to cover. But I'll try to go as fast as I can. So the biggest concept to understand, one of the biggest concepts, is the difference between forward kinematics and inverse kinematics. And honestly, it took me a long time to understand the difference between them too. Any animation program will give you the ability to switch between those two, FK or IK. So forward kinematics is basically, in our rig that we have right here, by default, the lower body is set to IK and everything else is set to FK. So you can see right here, if the box is checked, that means inverse kinematics is enabled. If the box isn't checked, that means it's FK. So, and these are keyframeable, so you can switch between FK and IK frame by frame if you wanted to. So you could make one movement in IK and then switch it to FK and have another setting stored. So you can switch between FK and IK as you go. So this rig has a skeleton inside of it, and there's bones in there. Like they say, the chin bone is connected to the neck bone, and or whatever, or however it goes. Basically, the child bone don't affect the parent bones. So like if I selected this here, and this is going to be the lower arm, if I come down in here closer, and if I hit spacebar, you'll see I can toggle between scaling, position, and rotation. But if I'm on position and I move this lower arm, it's not really moving the upper arm. It's what it's doing is it's actually stretching it. So it says lower arm FK control, but it's really moving the upper arm right there. You see that? And as I move it, I can stretch it and make it into a monster if I wanted to. So the bones are just used for deforming the skeletal mesh. So at the end of the day, bones are just deforming objects. They're just deforming entities. So I can stretch this out and create a really odd looking stretchy monster man. But I'm only moving, if I move this thing, I'm just moving that one segment of the arm is really all I'm doing. I'm not moving this lower arm here. So like if I select this lower arm and move it, you'll see I'm moving just it. See, this is called hand, but I'm actually moving the lower arm there. And this one is called lower arm, but I'm actually moving just the upper arm there. So it's just a per bone. And so this child, this hand, isn't going to affect this parent, even though they're all connected. But if I move this one up here, if I select this control and I move it, you see how I'm moving the hand and everything beneath it follows. So that's really the core principle of it, is that the parent controls the children, but the children don't control the parent. And it's not as constrained because you're able to do these kind of bizarre stretching. You can't do that otherwise. Now, I've been jumping all over the place. I want to show you something. If we open these up down here, there's two ways we can control things in here. One is by doing what we're doing, is just dragging on the item in the scene. But we also have these numeric controls down here, and I've been playing with them. Well, what I can do, rather than trying to figure out where this was precisely, I can just change it numerically and set it to 0. So go 0, 0, 0, and I can reset it exactly to where it was. So I had messed around with all these. So if you ever get in here and you mess something up and you just want to put it back to where it was and you're not sure where it was precisely, just come in here and change these values back to their usually 0. It's usually 0 is the default setting for everything. But you see I've really kind of messed things up here. So the hand, I think, is the last one. But I should have everything back after I zero this out. So 0, 0, oops, 0, and 0. Now I should be back to where I was. So that's basically forward kinematics. The children bone don't affect the parents. But as you move a bone, you may not, it feels when you're positioning things, like let's say I have this upper arm, and let me go to a rotation here. It feels very robotic as I'm moving, making these movements. But if you look at the end point, it's actually making a circular movement. Like if my hand were to draw it in space, I'd be making a circle movement. So because I'm turning it on a joint, the movement, even though it feels robotic, it's actually a circular motion, ultimately, that I'm making with the hand. So that's interesting right there. Right there. So I want to kind of put that back again to where it was. So I come back here and you see how it's changed on the rotation again. So I can zero those out to put that back to the basic standard pose right there. So 0, 0. And it's, like I said, because you can stretch things, and we'll be doing that a little bit later, it's less constrained than IK. Now the feet by default are set to IK. So if we come down here, you'll see what's going on there. As a matter of fact, one way to really show this the best is if you see that hexagon there, if I click that, that's the body control. And if I go through spacebar, I can go through the controls. Now watch this. If I get on this arrow here and pull down, you see how the knees bend? Just like that. So I could actually animate him doing squats like that. Just like that. So that's because his feet are on IK, and so they're locked. So I could move the feet, or I can even move the whole body just by doing that. So like to move the foot, if I wanted to move the foot, I just click on the foot here, and if I move this, see, I can move the entire foot up and see how it bends. He's doing like the Karate Kid kind of thing right there, right? The crane thing. So that's what inverse kinematics does. To animate this in inverse kinematic mode, you would have to come here under global control and enable all that. So that's kind of just the basics of it. It's a lot of work to come in and hand key everything. But there's certain animations, like if you just wanted to turn his head, like let's say that's all we wanted to do. I'll leave him standing like that for right now. But let's say I wanted to just turn his head from left to right. So I could search for head over here in the Anim Outliner, search for head. And you see there's this one. And this is under FK control right now. If we come here and look at on the global controls, I'm scrolling on the left side over here. You see this is FK controls. So the head right now is under FK control. So if I clicked on this, it's going to come in over here. If I try to turn the head here, like let me get up closer. You can't really see from way up here. If I try to turn the head right now and toggle through the controls, you see how I can't turn anything even though it looks like it's responding? That's because the IK is not enabled. So I would have to enable the IK control in order to move the head. But if I click this control, which is an FK control, which is enabled, I can actually turn the head. You see that? So I can enable this. So I can just have him turn his head with the FK control. I don't need, there's no particular reason that I need IK to turn his head right now. Let's just make his head go back and forth a little bit here. So if I come up to the top, for the very first keyframe, I probably want to lock everything in position. So I'll just hit this, where it says mannequin body, and keyframe everything in position. Then all I have to do, there's these controls down here, which are actually really good. This one will move you a frame at a time, which is very helpful. But if you're in a rush, you could drag it out here on your own. And if you hit control and scroll wheel, you can, let's make this a little bit longer animation. So I'm hitting control, we can span out, grab this, we can extend the length of our animation out, let's say 1,000 frames. So we have a lot of room to work with. And then with this control, we can zoom in or zoom out a little bit here. There we go. So now we have some thing to work with, some space to work with. Now remember, this is 30 frames a second. So how fast does someone turn their head? In about a second, right? So I could drag this to the 30 frame right around there. This is his starting position. So now if I turn his head to the other side, he's going to turn his head in about a second, but that seems a little much, so we'll just put it there. It's going to make an automatic keyframe. I can drag this out a little bit further and then turn it the rest of the way. So he's turning his head kind of slow. I can drag it out a little bit more, and I'll just turn his head back the other way. Now if I come back and I hit play, you should see him turning his head from side to side. But in a sense, it looks very too smooth and there's no physics involved in here. So it is coming across as kind of a very robotic look, but then again, he is a robot. So let's say I want his head to come back to the front position here with the head control selected. Let's see, let's click here, head control. I can just, let me get in there again, closer. I can go ahead and just turn it forward. Now in the beginning of this tutorial on the screen, it talked about atrocities, and and what we can do is, you know, we can scale things up. So I don't know if you've seen that Skibbity toilet guy, but it's basically it's a guy's head in a toilet. And if you wanted to do something like that, it would be really easy to do, to like scale this person's head up into and make it into a monster. So if I just sit here, go back to the beginning and hit play, he's just standing there looking this way, he's looking that way, he's looking that way, he stops right there. Now let's say he holds in this position for right now. With the head selected, I can, oops, select the head again. It's the problem if you hit the space bar, what happens is it hits play, so, and I don't want it to play, so pause it. Okay, so make sure the control is selected in the scene, you can toggle through it. Well, what I can do now is I can pull his head up like that, right? And make it really tall. So if I come back to the beginning and hit play, he's going to kind of do a giraffe thing, where his head comes up. And it's interesting because the mesh is holding up pretty well, so he now looks like some really freaky monster, right? And then we can animate him in any direction. If we want to just move his entire body and move him upwards, we come to body control here. I can clear this out here. We come to body control. I can set a keyframe right there to kind of lock things right there. I can move down a little bit further here, and I can raise him up in the air. And see how he comes up? Just like that. And then I can move this a little bit further down the road here. And on the body control, I can drill in here. And I'm pretty sure it's on the, is it the Y for his forward? I can move him forward. And it's interesting because you'll notice that the legs are kind of hanging behind and creating kind of an awkwardness there. So I can pull him back a little bit there. So there's just a ton of stuff you can get in here and start creating. It's really fantastic. And there's just a lot to it. So right there, what we could do, one thing we could do if we like that pose is we could actually just freeze this out and then use that to animate. So anyway, let's just stop with the animation for right now and start playing around with how do we actually film this? How do we get this all working? So what we're going to do is I'm just going to come up here to the top. I'm going to collapse all this. And if I right click, you'll see I have an option to bake pose asset. So let's say just go ahead and bake that. And I'm just going to store that on the content folder. I'll just leave it called pose asset. And it baked out this right here. And then if I right click again, I can go bake animation sequence. And I can put it on the content folder and leave it called SK mannequin sequence and just export to animation. And now it's done that. Now if I come back in here, I can close out, well, I don't know, I guess I can't close out my sequencer. And I can just get rid of this control rig mannequin for right now. I'll just, can't I just delete them? It's going to break some references, it says. So I guess I'll leave them in there for right now. But let's come over here and get another mannequin now. Well, I've rendered out what I needed. It doesn't really matter if I break. See, I'm going to go ahead and delete him. Yes. So we broke the reference. We broke our sequence that we did. But I want to show you something. So anyway, if we come in here to mannequins and let's see, meshes, we can just bring in any animated character. So we can go ahead and just bring in Quinn, and we can actually just bring her in idle mode right now. And then what we can do is if we go to, well, actually we can just right click and go cinematics level sequence, and then we've got her, right? So we got to add her to the sequencer, so we can go track, add to sequencer, MF idle, and that's her. Now she has a control rig on by default, but we don't need her to have a control rig, so we can just delete that control rig, right? And you see where it says animation here? Well, by default she's got that idle animation, but we should be able to come in and give her the animation we just made. And so now if I go to the beginning and hit play, she should be doing what we just created. Doing that kind of weird thing, right? Oh, I want to extend this out. So, like I said, you can hit Control and scroll wheel to come out on your playhead here. Well, what we can do, one thing is just put this like at 1,000, the in frames here. Oops. 1,000, 1,000 on the in frames. And then just what we need is, we got to drag this red bar, it controls the length of our sequence. There we go. And now if I go play, we should be able to see the whole thing. And her head comes up kind of weird like that. And then I think she's going to go into the air, right? There she goes. Off she goes, right? Okay. So that's kind of cool, right? I mean, it's just crazy, kind of weird stuff, right? Okay, so Now let's say I wanted to film this. All I have to do, and this should be, I hope I'm not preaching to the choir too much here, is we would just come up here. We can go out of animation mode and go to look for cine camera and just drag that onto the scene right here. Oops, not too far. Pull it up. Actually, what I can do is just click on her and copy her location. Click on the cine camera and then paste. So I'm right down here. I don't know where. I'm closer. Anyway. And then I can hit spacebar. Should be seeing her pretty quick here. There she is. Okay, it takes a little while to get finagling with all this, right? So we're going to get our camera here. I'm just pulling back a little bit. Pull back a little bit more. Go up, maybe go up a little bit. But there she is. Now, it would just be a... It's funny because it just looks so bizarre. But what we can do on the camera, with the camera selected, is we can make sure it's... And then let's just go ahead and open up our field of view here so we can see the whole thing. And then we can just lower it here a little bit. So now we should have a picture of the whole thing. And of course you could play around with this and frame this up. But then what we would do is we go to track, add to sequencer, add cine camera. It brings in this thing called camera cuts. We click on camera, we got to add the camera there. And that little icon there, we just simply click that. And now we're seeing what camera cuts it's seeing. And now if I come back to the beginning, I can also switch my view to cine camera to make sure I'm seeing the correct things. Cine camera. Yeah. And there is what we should be filming. And then we can play around with our camera position. If we come over here under transform, we can move things around here and here, however we want to adjust our camera height or position or whatever. And then all we'd have to do is just come here, click here, this button here, and we would just go ahead and pick a folder where we want to render it out. I can just put it here on my D drive, and I can turn off compression. I can just make it an AVI file, go capture movie. We're not going to save anything, and then it's going to render out the movie here. You can't, it's only showing you part of the screen, so don't get concerned that you're missing something. You're not missing anything. And that's our initial look at the control rig and how to get the animation out and how to film it. And there you go. And the world is yours from here. So anyway, I hope you found this helpful. Take care, have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time.